Hello, everyone. Brain diseases and disorders, of which there are over 400, affect 1 in 3 persons around the globe. Brain diseases are the leading cause of disability around the world and the second leading cause of death worldwide. Unfortunately, there's been actually a 40% increase in death due to neurological diseases over the past 3 decades. And estimates are that at the current pace, there will be a 50% increase in disability due to neurological disorders by 2040, unless we are very intentional about changing what is within our collective power to change. When you look at the economic costs alone of just stroke and dementia, just 2 of the neurological disorders worldwide, the cost alone is 2.2 trillion US dollars, and the personal costs, I don't need to tell you, are incalculable. It must be said that 70% of all of that burden falls on low and middle income countries around the world. And so it's on that backdrop that the World Health Organization, their new Intersectoral Global Action Plan, or IGAP, on epilepsy and other neurological disorders was adopted unanimously by the World Health Assembly just in May of last year. That's a big deal. And this plan represents an integrated approach to neurology and neurological conditions across the globe and envisions a world in which brain health is valued, promoted, and protected across the life course. It articulates strategic objectives and targets, identifying significant achievement in those targets, and the means to verify success when it occurs. So this marks the dawn of really a new era for neurological disorders, for neurology, and for the human race, quite frankly, given the importance of brain health for all of us. And it comes at a time when many of the most devastating neurological conditions are predictable, preventable, and treatable. So we're very privileged actually to have Mayowa Owolabi with us today to talk about this sort of sea change in neurology and in brain health. Mayowa, if you've ever had a chance to listen to him, you'll understand that why he has his first name. It means to bring joy. So listening to Mayowa will bring you joy. He's a professor of neurology, and he's the dean and the faculty of clinical sciences at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. He's coming to us live from Nigeria today. He's among the top 10 Nigerian scientists who are among the global top 2% of scientists worldwide. Based on his findings on the dominant modifiable risk factors for stroke in Africans, he has developed the first Afrocentric stroke riskometer model, as well as the Seed of Life model, a stroke levity scale, and the stroke recovery scale. So Dr. Owolabi, pleasure to have you here. It's a privilege to have you presenting here live from Nigeria today, and we're grateful for your ambassadorship on our academy as well as for this presentation today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, David, for that very, very generous introduction. And thank you for this golden opportunity, which I really cherish a lot, to talk about the neurology revolution. I think it's a very great privilege and honor. Thank you so very much for this opportunity. Yeah, I don't need to go through this. So I'm going to talk about the neurological diseases burden, touch a little bit in terms of details, more details than had been kindly provided by Dr. David. I will talk about the WHO IGAP, the brain health, talk about the neurological quadrangle, holistic and spiritual health, frontiers of the neurology revolution, and visions of things to come. And it's going to be a mixture. The menu is a rich menu of a mixture of science with medicine, with medical humanities, policy, and impact. So the neurological disorders, as has been mentioned, are the leading cause of disability-adjusted life years across the globe, and the second leading cause of global death. Therefore, as a group, they are actually the most important group of disorders across the globe, especially as they contribute the fastest growing rate to the cause of death among NCDs. As we are well aware, 74% of deaths now is due to NCDs, and neurological conditions contribute the lion's share And indeed, more than 40% increase in the past 30 years. And it remains the second leading cause of death. Stroke alone contributes about $900 billion per annum. And this was as at 2017 when we estimated this as part of the WHO Lancet Commission on Stroke. When we also projected up to 2050, and this is being prepared as part of the Commission report, which is going to be launched at the bicentennial celebration of the Lancet series of journals. The Lancet Commission on Stroke report is going to be launched. We did a projection of the stroke burden for the next 30 years up to 2050, as well as economic cost. And we saw that these actually are also rising. Dementia in 2019 cost at as much as 1.3 trillion US dollars. Now, the top 15 causes of the neurological burden are stroke, which is number one, leading cause of death. And then headache disorders, number two, and that includes migraine, that includes tension type headaches, Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, meningitis, epilepsy, spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, brain and other CNS cancers, tension type headaches, encephalitis, Parkinson's disease, other neurological conditions, and that includes depression, sleep disorders, tetanus, multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease. These are the top 15 that accounts for most of the burden of neurological conditions across the globe and in different regions of the globe, as you can see. And almost everywhere you see stroke and migraine are either number one or number two. And the burden is not abating. Using stroke as an example, in fact, the number of people that are suffering from stroke, either incident stroke or prevalent stroke or deaths, has increased in the last 20 years by 70% for incidents, 85% for prevalence, and 43% for deaths. The Intersectoral Global Action Plan on Epilepsy and other neurological conditions was launched recently. That was May 2022 by the World Health Organization in the World Health Assembly, and it was subscribed to by 197 countries. And it's an action plan to tackle epilepsy and other neurological conditions from 2022 all the way to 2031. This Intersectoral Global Action Plan included a vision of a world in which brain health is valued, promoted, and protected across the life course. Brain is actually the most important resource of man, which has to be protected. And we'll talk more about that. Neurological disorders are prevented. People affected by neurological disorders and their carers attain the highest possible level of health. And then stigma is reduced. And of course, the impact of stigma and the burden of neurological disorders generally, including associated mortality, morbidity, and disability, are reduced across the globe. And all of this is to improve the quality of life of people living with neurological disorders, their families, their carers, and in fact also prevent neurological conditions from developing where preventable. And the guiding principles include using primary healthcare centers, universal health coverage, intersectoral action, empowerment, raising prioritization and strengthening governance, and so on and so forth. So the proposed actions across the member states, among which 197 has already supported and subscribed, includes prioritization and governance, diagnosis, treatment, and care, promotion and prevention, research, innovation, and information systems, which is extremely important for advancement, to create new solutions for improved surveillance, improved prevention, primordial prevention, primary prevention, secondary prevention, improved acute care and treatment, as well as improved rehabilitation. And of course, public health approach to all of these conditions. So, and this also involves engaging as many stakeholders and NGOs as possible with roles that would help improve prioritization, diagnosis, treatment, care promotion, prevention, research, innovation, and information systems, as well as public health approach to treating and taming the burden of these conditions. But more is needed in terms of care pathways, in terms of medicines, diagnostics, health products, health worker capacity building, which is extremely important, particularly in low and middle income countries, and of course, carer support. And this is going to be done in the context of, first of all, prioritizing the key neurological conditions, some of which we've mentioned, like epilepsy, like dementia, like stroke, like traumatic injuries. These are all very important. And then sorting these out within the context of the continuum of care, promotion, prevention, diagnosis, treatment, rehabilitation. And within the context of other initiatives within the WHO, which includes mental health, NCDs, social determinants of diseases, and also some communicable diseases like meningitis, which contribute to the body of neurological conditions, particularly in low and middle income countries. And all of these across the life course, and of course, by re-engineering the health and social care system and utilizing the opportunities of the universal health care coverage, as well as the primary health care systems, to advance and expedite the development and the impacts of the WHO IGAP. Now, this is extremely important. The human race have gone through evolution and revolutions. And in terms of revolutions, the human race had experienced the agricultural revolution. We are all familiar also with the industrial revolution, and of course with the information age and the information revolution. And to illustrate a little bit about how some of these have happened, electricity, which is negative, positive charges coming together, producing spark, which is light. And in this lecture is also like bringing thesis and antithesis together to provide synthesis. So discovery sometimes, which may be serendipitous, but sometimes involves a lot of activity, scientific activity, to discover new phenomena and describe new phenomena, which could be transformative and actually revolutionary. So of course, the discovery of electricity has been extremely revolutionary. And again, just to mention Alexander Fleming, this is also another revolutionary thing. As physicians, most of the time, we're in the consulting room attending to one patient or maybe a patient and their family, whereas a single discovery in the lab may actually be transformative and have impact that may save millions of lives, like this discovery of penicillin, very long time ago, but which has had significant impact down the line. And then sometimes the impossible can be made possible. Several centuries ago, it would be impossible to imagine aviation. But if you dream big, even some of the things that are still in the realm of science fiction may be possible. And again, this tells us about the power of the human brain and how this can be protected and harnessed to take man to the next level, the next revolution, which we've termed the neurology revolution, which is the title of this lecture. So again, the DNA structure, described by Watson and Crick, has been transformative in ushering in the genomic revolution, which, of course, we know how big the human genome is, more than 6.4 billion letters. Again, that brings us to the realm of big data science as part of the information revolution, which is part of the industrial revolution. And these also, this big data science, which you need also to understand genomics, particularly whole genome sequencing, also overlaps with the realm of artificial intelligence and, of course, the transformative realm of mixed realities. For instance, this lecture, I am in a room in Nigeria, but I'm actually in the room of so many people across the globe through the facility and the forum provided by the Atrium, by the Atria Academy. So in all of these, for reproducibility, for impact, for evidence, and for pragmatism, we always, empiricism, we always follow the scientific method, which all of us are too familiar with, and I therefore will not be going through this. Essentially, the scientific method helps us to unravel, not only just starting with hypotheses, but helps us to unravel and discover theories and laws of nature and laws of supernature, which we can leverage to improve our lot as mankind, and not forgetting our planet as well and the universe as a whole. We identify what problems and challenges are, we profile solutions, and we continue to grow. And this is the revolution and evolution that mankind has experienced. The world had in the past witnessed the agricultural, industrial, and information revolutions, most of which are focused on things outside of man, even though they serve man. Here comes the neurology revolution, which has as its epicenter the brain. So far, this is the only revolution that is homocentric. This revolution will power all aspects of human well-being and welfare through brain health. Here we are. So last year was a decisive year, which may be signaling the onset, the advent of this all-important revolution towards ensuring and restoring brain health across the life course and optimizing brain health across the life course. Brain health is extremely important in terms of the capacity to learn and function adaptively in one's environment, the ability to think, to solve problems, to remember, to perceive, to communicate. All of these are within the concepts of brain health, under the auspices of brain health, within the confines of and domains of brain health. And these as interplay between genes, between environment, between lifestyle, which has to be unraveled and harnessed. There has been a lot of different types of definitions of brain health by different organizations, by the WHO, but I've tried to synthesize this into something that is more holistic. Brain health is the complete functioning of the brain across the life course to support the full physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being and quality of life of an individual towards attaining and maintaining the epitome, the peak, the zenith of meaningful, impactful, purposeful, and productive life. Brain health involves protecting the brain, not waiting until a disease has occurred, promoting brain function, harnessing brain function, and expanding and extending brain reserve, and maintaining eumentia throughout the life course. And therefore, brain health is extremely important, as it is a nucleus that interfaces and determines physical and mental health. For instance, for an hypertensive patient to take his or her medication, he has to be motivated, he has to find purpose, he has to know that he wants to live longer, before that can happen. Same thing with social health, and same thing with our corporate or combined responsibility as a human race to protect our planet before venturing outside of the planet into the utmost extremes, wherever that becomes possible, of the universe. And of course, our galaxy first and then the universe. And spiritual well-being is extremely important, even though many times it's invisible and is abstract, but is extremely important. So the neurology revolution has started. Our aim is not only to add years to life as physicians. That's usually not enough. And a lot of philosophical questions arise when you have a patient, for instance, with very severe bihemispheric brain injury, who is almost at a vegetative state, and you wonder, what is the essence of life? What is the purpose of adding years to such a life, if life could not be added to the years being added to that man's or woman's life? Not only adding life to years, but it's also important to add meaning to life, to live a meaningful and impactful life towards self-realization and self-actualization. And we are in a world now where we run a knowledge economy, no longer an economy that is based on mineral resources or commodities. The priceless and the greatest commodity is brain capital. And so brain health is extremely important, as is brain skills in terms of creativity, systems integration, design thinking, innovation, emotional regulation, cognition, social cognition, self-awareness, self-control, entrepreneurship, resilience. All of these are attributes, skills, characteristics that distinguishes and sets man aside from other primates and helps us to continue to advance, discover, advance, evolve. And this is very important for brain economy. So brain health, therefore, is at the epicenter of SDG 3. As we are all aware, the Sustainable Development Goal 3 is health, and brain health is required for health to be optimized. And without health, all the other SDGs are meaningless and moribund and cannot be advanced. We need not forget, the quick reminder is what the whole world experienced with the COVID-19 pandemic, which drove everything to a standstill, and the world was at a pause, so to speak. So that tells us how important our health is. Health is the greatest wealth we can have, and brain health is the greatest health we can all have. So brain health has to be understood in the context of the factors that determine it: social factors, political factors, biomedical factors, psychological factors, economic factors, environmental factors. And therefore, the interventions also must be holistic, socio-ecologic, holistic, psychospiritual as well, life course, synergistic, global movements, as well as whole of government and whole of society, approach across the life course, before birth all the way till death, or even beyond. And so social determinants are very important. Policy, politics, governance, cultural, societal norms, all of these influence social position, education, occupation, income, which we know influence behavior. And biological factors like hypertension, like dyslipidemia, other vascular risk factors, obesity, diet, all of which are extremely important in then determining brain health and, in fact, general well-being. So I'm going to illustrate by bringing forward this concept of brain quadrangle, which has 4 pillars. We also call this the neurology quadrangle across the life course. The 4 pillars of the quadrangle improves epidemiological surveillance, which is very important in terms of accurately, as much as possible, describing the burden. That includes incidence, prevalence, mortality, trends, determinants, cause, risk factors, genomic, transomic, environmental, providing evidence, because research in terms of describing burden, describing determinants and innovation for new treatments are very important in terms of providing evidence for planning and designing interventions. And then health promotion and disease prevention, which is the second pillar, primordial, primary, secondary prevention of neurological conditions, are very important to reduce incidence and prevalence of neurological conditions, provided, of course, we know the determinants to be targeted, including the social determinants, genetic determinants, and the intermediate risk factors that we're familiar with. And acute care is very important to reduce mortality, and that requires early and accurate diagnosis. And then rehabilitation and palliative care are extremely important to improve DALYs and improve health-related quality of life. So therefore, interventions for promoting and restoring brain health must be global. In some instances, there may be disease-specific approaches, but it can also be cross-cutting approaches for improving surveillance, research, diagnosis, novel biomarkers, novel prognostic and risk prediction tools, prevention, treatment, rehabilitation, and restoration. So therefore, using the lens of transomics to look at the molecular mechanisms including transcriptomics, including metabolomics, including proteomics, microbiomics, and so on and so forth, we can fully understand the molecular determinants and therefore be able to come up with biomarkers for prediction, for severity, and for prognostication. And of course, clinical trial enrichment, rational polypharmacy, drug targets, including new molecules or drug repurposing due to new factors or SNPs or CMVs that might have been identified through genomics and transomics. And this is the realm of precision medicine. And the dream and in the realm of precision medicine is a time when, for instance, a patient comes in with hypertension. You do not need to titrate medication. You just know the right drug to use at the right dose, and that is it. Or a time comes when you are able to give a single therapy, one shot, that almost cures hypertension or is able to cure other risk factors of stroke, as an example. The only mechanism by which you can advance through this, at least apparently now, is through transomics, even though this may still be a long way off. I will just showcase the possibilities and potentials of this kind of science, illustrating with the Stroke Investigatory Research and Education Network, which is the largest study of stroke in Africa, which funded by the NIH as part of the H3 Africa to usher and enable genomic revolution on the African continent. We've had over 100 publications, more than 40 presentations, several awards, for the Wild Awards, Bruce Schoenberg Award for Neuroepidemiology of the American Academy of Neurology, and so on and so forth. So one of our star publications was in the Lancet, and this is about the topmost risk factors for stroke on the continent, which are modifiable. One very, very intriguing but very pleasant discovery, which has been very consistent, was that we found a protective factor. Daily consumption of green leafy vegetable protected by far better than weekly consumption, and of course more than not consuming. We use not consuming or monthly consumption as reference, and this has been very consistent. And in fact, we found this dose-response relationship, which was actually spotted by the reviewer of this article when we submitted it for review. We also found this relationship with stroke severity as well as stroke fatality, which are published. I mean, this is for stroke fatality. This was recently published in February, also in Lancet. There are other determinants of stroke fatality, but green leafy vegetable consumption was protective. Therefore, low consumption of green leafy vegetable was a risk factor. Then we also try to find out about green leafy vegetable and its relationship with the risk factors of stroke directly. And we're able to describe an inverse relationship between consumption of green leafy vegetable and the emergence of hypertension, such that indigenous Africans who consumed at least 12 servings of vegetables per week were significantly less likely to be found hypertensive. And this was a study that was cross-cutting across several African countries, also recently published. So using some of these factors, modifiable, non-modifiable risk factors, this can be targeted for primordial prevention, for primary prevention, and for secondary prevention of stroke. Some of the factors that we find. For instance, consumption of green leafy vegetable can prevent emergence of the risk factors, and also can prevent emergence or development of stroke. Those are just examples. And we are trying to practicalize this into policy by working with policymakers and other stakeholders across the continent. Then the genetic aspect is also very important, because stroke itself is a very complex trait, which is an interplay and culmination of several intermediate pathways that shows an interplay between genetics and environment. So we were the first to report the association between apolipoprotein L1 and small vessel disease stroke. And in the first GWAS study of stroke on the continent of Africa, we've been able to find novel risk factors at genome-wide association level. We found 2 SNPs, which are very important, and they're under review at the moment for publication in a very high impact journal. And these loci that we found, many of them were actually regulatory, and this shows the importance that regulatory loci may have in the pathobiology of ischemic stroke in indigenous Africans and in people of African ancestry. We're also part of the largest study, genomic study of stroke globally, which is the IGAP stroke, in which 89 variants were unraveled. Some of them had trans-ancestry implications, some of them were mono-ancestry in terms of implication, and risk prediction tools, which sometimes are portable across ancestries, but many times are actually not. But these are all important. Now, in a nutshell, we've tried to synthesize our findings in the Siren study into an Afrocentric stroke scometer, which has a very, very high predictive value, about 97%. That's already published. So we developed this into a mobile phone app, which within 2 minutes can tell the risk of stroke for an individual on a scale of 0 to 100%. And we converted our findings into a stroke video, stroke educational video. And then combining these two, we've done a pilot trial, which demonstrated impact over 2 months, substantial reduction in the percentage risk of developing stroke, as well as a significant reduction in systolic blood pressure in the intervention arm, 11 millimeters of mercury, 5 millimeters of mercury roughly, in the control group. And this is has been accepted for publication. Then we have this community-based study of over 100,000 people, which is a longitudinal population study, health and demographic surveillance sites, where we're using digital tool, mobile health for stroke surveillance, actually the first of its kind, which includes a stroke alert system as well as a stroke finding system as components of a stroke information and surveillance system. This is an ongoing study. Once this is concluded, it will be something that we may be able to recommend across the globe to improve surveillance of stroke using digital tools and perhaps prevent the need for door-to-door surveys to make this possible. So, and we are already developing the largest, the most comprehensive, most inclusive health resource for Africa, for the African continent, the African Biobanks and Longitudinal Epidemiological Ecosystem, which is being supported through a quadruple helix approach involving academia, involving industry, NGOs, government, and the public. Essentially, this is supposed to be like an overarching resource for all existing and, of course, new data, as well as bio specimen resources for all health conditions on the continent of Africa. Of course, we're going to start with NCDs and converting these these resources through an ecosystem that transforms all of this using data science into precision medicine products and into SDG impact across the continent. So, and of course, precision medicine products will include precision medications, prediction prognostication, novel biomarkers, and so on and so forth. And this has been generously already referred to and mentioned by Dr. David Doddick during his generous introduction of the Global Award on Outstanding Contributions to Clinical Stroke Research in 2021. In recognition of our contributions and our role in the Lancet Commission for Stroke across the globe. So, implications, applications, models, visions of things to come on the neurology revolution. So, as part of the WHO Lancet work, we have this publication on primary stroke prevention worldwide, translating evidence into action. And of course, the global stroke control observatory and risk reduction ecosystem, which includes engagement. Usually when we have intellectual products from our studies or guidelines, we usually just target physicians. But now we have to think in an holistic manner that involves policymakers, communicating to them policy briefs and communicating to them economic advantage of investment into health. And of course, this time around, brain health and stroke prevention and treatment, providers, patients, caregivers, payers, they are all equal stakeholders. And the general population, working through implementation partners, commissioners, and the steering committee and the operations committee, and resources being provided by World Bank, World Economic Forum, WHO, and so on and so forth to tame the global burden of stroke. That's part of what we recommended for primary prevention of stroke across the globe. And of course, this is extremely important. This is a convergence of more than 19 theories for implementation science that puts capability, opportunity, and motivation at the epicenter of anything we want to do, any change that we want to engineer must not only motivate people, but must provide opportunity for that change to be possible and the capability for that to be possible. And you can see, if you go across different sectors, you can see how this has to involve everybody, how holistic it must be, how it must involve all part of government and all the different sectors. This is just to show that to make impact involves bringing all hands on deck. So to optimize brain health across the life course involves everybody. And so we need to understand the journey of the brain from childhood till death. Neuroplasticity, the stage of chronic neuronal loss, and how all these can be mitigated and reduced across the life course by improving brain reserve. So the WHO proposed in the brain health position paper how to address brain health determinants, how to optimize brain structure and function across the life course, and how to enhance well-being, improve their social and of course economic benefits, and enhance brain capital. So physical health, very, very important also for brain health. Vice versa, there is a bidirectional relationship between physical health as well as brain health. Healthy environments are very important. Safety and security, learning and social connection, and access to quality services. All of these are extremely critical. And like we've said, brain health is really very important. It's like the nucleus, the epicenter, which influences physical and mental health, influences social health and planetary health. And all of these are influenced by spiritual well-being, which is often neglected. So therefore, for instance, in the field of neurorehabilitation, advancement occurs through neuroplasticity, or which is part of the first phase of neurorehabilitation or recovery, is characterized by neuroplasticity, and therefore advancement can occur in that field through the biophysical model. But there's also the adaptive model, or the adaptive phase of recovery, in which the psychospiritual model is extremely important to restore life, to restore liveliness, and to restore livelihood, and to restore meaning and purpose to life. And this is not esoteric, because it's been found, for instance, in Alzheimer's disease, that the pathological burden of disease may be mitigated by the sense of purpose in life. It's been found that those who had higher levels of sense of purpose in life exhibited better cognitive function despite the burden of disease. And this is published. So higher levels of purpose in life reduce the effect of Alzheimer's disease pathological changes in cognitive decline. This is just one example. There have been several examples in so many other conditions, which time will not permit me to illustrate. So purpose of life, our sense of purpose in life, is an extremely important thing. When we want to talk about rehabilitation, we always talk about quality of life. Well, how do we talk about related quality of life and quality of life without first of all understanding what life is, what the essence of life is, and what the purpose of life is? So purpose of life is the principle of intentionality and central life mission that commands and energizes behavior with a tendency to derive meaning from life experiences. The supreme purpose of life is to achieve the true and perpetual life, freedom, joy, purity, perfection, through resonance of being to life within, and the evolution, growth, and flourish and fruition of the seed of life within. So these are all published in the seed of life model, which I will not be able to go into detail about. But true life, if it is really purely life, should not contain any element of death. Just like perfect life should not contain any iota of darkness. So true life really is not supposed to be mortal. And we have all of this published. Can't go into details, but this is a question that has reverberated the entire existence of mankind, even before Plato and up to the time of Plato and up till now, describing the bidirectional mobility of the soul. For instance, Plato said, when the soul is firmly fixed on the domain where truth and reality shine resplendent, it apprehends and knows them and appears to possess reason. When perfectly and fully winged, the soul soars upwards. So this is describing the bidirectional mobility of the soul. Again, Aristotle mentioned in contemplating the subject or examining the subjects of life versus mortality and immortality. If reason is divine, then in comparison with man, the life according to it is divine in comparison with human life. But we must not follow those who advise us, being men, to think of human things and being mortal, of mortal things, but must, so far as we can, make ourselves immortal and strain every nerve to live in accordance with the best thing in us. For even if it is small in bulk, much more does it in power and what surpass everything. These would seem to be each man himself, since it is the authoritative and better part of him, and so on and so forth, about making ourselves immortal. And Abraham Maslow had examined this and came up with this pyramid, which, of course, like every pyramid, the base is usually the widest. You have so many people just at that level, but the aspiration and the goal is to move on, not just from physiological needs, safety needs, belonging and love needs, to esteem needs, to cognitive needs, which again speaks to brain health, aesthetic needs, self-actualization, and transcendence. So this is something that has always been a question. And the achievement and fulfillment of the supreme purpose of life provides the highest possible quality of life. Of course, people have different aspirations, and there are different levels of this pyramid, as we know. But it's extremely important. Again, this is a concept I'm bringing in from neurology, the concept of Simultanagnosia, that again underscores the reason why we need not miss the tree for the forest, or vice versa. People who suffer from Simultanagnosia, they can copy images line by line without understanding what they've actually copied. They can copy the picture of a key, but they really didn't know that it was a key they copied, or a bird. But they get all the lines right, you know, and the curves where they should be. So hence, holistic medicine is extremely important. Whole person medicine aims to maximize health-related quality of life and help individuals discover, rediscover, and fulfill their purpose in life. And the impact, of course, can be measured through health-related quality of life measures. And there has been a spike, an exponential rise in recent times about the interplay between spirituality and medicine, and the effect and the impact, including scientific impact, evidence-based impact of spirituality on medicine. And this is from PubMed. So essence of life, or the being of man, is in the end, the most important thing in man, which is evolution, ascendancy. The meaning and essence of human life is constituted by the purpose and being, which is the soul, both of which can modify the mind of man. And programming is also very important. Now we know how important programming is in this age of artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and so on and so forth. Programming, again, programming, purpose, plan, these are all interrelated, and the brain is involved in terms of programming and planning what happens to man, as our genes are involved also in determining what happens to us. So quality of life is the extent to which the supreme purpose of life is fulfilled. The supreme purpose of the human being is to achieve true and perpetual life and dwell in infinite freedom. So quality may be read from the mind, meaning may be read from the soul, and purpose may be read from the spirit. We usually measure self-reported health-related quality of life, which is multidimensional status of functioning based on individuals' perception of his or her present status vis-a-vis needs, expectations, goals, hopes, and aspirations. And usually, before we can develop measures for health-related quality of life, we need to understand quality of life, philosophy of life, as has been mentioned before. And there is the Atman's model, which recognized the different strata, the human body, mind, and spirit. And the Shiller's model also, the Seed of Life model, leverage these two concepts, and of course also the philosophies of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. And these are all published. A little bit of something to get us thinking. if as neurologists that perhaps many people in the audience are, we know what the EEG looks like at different stages of sleep, from stage 1, non-REM sleep, all the way to stage 4, when it gets slower and slower. And then suddenly in REM sleep, it looks almost exactly like wakefulness. Is this trying to tell us something about the duality of our reality or our experiences? So, and what does this tell us? Autoscopic hallucination, e-autoscopy, out-of-body experience. Who is seeing who? These are phenomena that we have not fully understood or fully unraveled, which may be important in terms of understanding the human nature and supernature from the spiritual as well as the physical perspectives, and coming together to understand the mind, the brain, the body, the spirit, and the soul. So this philosophical anthropology was used to establish the seed of life model, which has these concentric rings, starting from the soul spirit at the epicenter, and then all the way to the physical body and the different domains. And these are all published. And the quality of life measure is actually the first holistic measure, and it's been shown to have psychometric attributes across the globe. And it's actually been interpreted or translated into more than 10 different languages and used across over a dozen countries across the globe. And it's been shown to be sensitive and responsive to change in health-related quality of life. And this was a transcultural study conducted in Berlin as well as in Ibadan. And we're able to find that the relationship between stroke severity and the different domains of quality of life using the HR code list show that the physical domain is the most impacted, psycho-emotional next, and cognitive next. But the soul spirit domains seems to be relatively resilient, relatively protected. So when stroke strikes, the outer rings are most affected, whereas the inner core of being seems to be relatively protected. And again, this brings us to the concept of disability paradox, whereby severity of stroke correlates in almost a linear fashion with the physical domain, but the spirit domain does not correlate with severity of stroke. Many people can still have very good spiritual functioning in spite of a severe stroke. And that can be tapped. So it's not really a paradox, really. So, and therefore we've labeled it disability disparity. Something paradoxical, you know, sometimes it's actually not a conflict with reality. It's just that we need to understand reality in a better way, because the spiritual sphere is a little bit different and therefore may be relatively protected. So based on determinants of health-related quality of life, we came up with the stroke recovery cycle, which intends to enhance sense of purpose and meaning in life, and through that, enhance internal adaptation and coping skills, emotional well-being and motivation, which can help cooperation and drive motivation, as well as the impact of physical intervention, the intensity, the duration of practice with physiotherapy, psychotherapy, and speech and language therapy, all of which improves quality of life and in turns improves sense of purpose in life, and so on and so forth, as the stroke recovery cycle. And the flow of life, and that taps on the flow of life and how the different aspects of the human nature communicates. We are familiar with some, but some are things we need to really understand and study more in this era of brain health and in this neurology revolution. We know, for instance, about psychosomatic diseases whereby the mind can influence the brain and the body. And we've also mentioned that the brain itself, which is the physical substrate for the mind, when it's damaged, for instance, in dementia, that can affect how the mind remembers things and processes the information. And the mind can communicate with the soul through introspection and meditation, some of which are beginning to have impact and implications and applications in medicine, including neurology. And of course, the soul can reach out to the mind through intuition, inspiration, creativity, and so on. And soul spirits can communicate through resonance, understanding, guidance, love, knowledge. Some of these are things that needs to be understood even further, and in the realms of neurophilosophy. Now comes energy therapy, which is tapping into this resilient spiritual sphere, and requires revolutionary and evolutionary thinking and integrative thinking and energy medicine to be able to do this. And logotherapy by Viktor Frankl, Fabrin definition, therapy through meaning, existential therapy, ontological therapy. So those are areas that can be explored. We've talked about the recovery cycle. And in fact, as far back as 2007, this was the conclusion in a paper published in Stroke by Kara L., titled Faith Under the Microscope, that perhaps is the time to expand the philosophy of rehabilitation and investigate interventions beyond healing the body to healing the spirit. Again, already prescribing or suggesting that we need to advance by understanding neurophilosophy and exploring the role that energy therapy may play in terms of motivational psychotherapy, spiritual psychotherapy, meditation, motivational heart work, spiritual or musical therapy, and so on. Improving the will to live, and the will not only to live, but to live a meaningful life, can motivate the flow of life energy from the inner being to the outer self. And that can have implications for brain health, not only in stroke, but also in other neurological conditions, and perhaps even in physical health. And actually, this is not something that is without evidence, because evidence is beginning to build on the impact of spirituality on health. Of course, we might need to explore this more, to define this more, for us to realize this. Perhaps we may be able to usher in future a situation whereby when we have a patient in front of us, we are not just looking at the phenome, the physical phenome, but also perhaps the spiritual phenome. We are not only just looking at diagnosis, etiology, treatment, prognosis, prevention, and follow-up, only in the sense of the body, but also perhaps in terms of mental health, in terms of spiritual health, in terms of eco-social health, in terms of internal coherence, and in terms of external harmony. And all of this requires, to get this to work, it requires ecosystems that do not only serve as observatory to monitor the burden and impact of neurological conditions, but also for risk reduction for neurological conditions. This is tailored after what we've done for stroke. Hopefully, we can have this kind of global ecosystem to realize the potentials and the promises of the neurology revolution. But there are challenges in terms of defining spirituality. So this needs to be worked on. This has been defined in terms of meaning and purpose, the search for inner freedom, and so on and so forth. But this has to be improved even further. Then objective assessment of spiritual well-being. This is something also that requires even more research and science. But we must remember also that not all things that can be counted counts, and not all things that can be counted. Time is important, and skills, time to be used by, in the consulting room to explore this, and even by researchers to be devoted into unraveling this best aspect of man that remains not fully explored. At the center of spirituality, of course, are several terms, which we can find in literature: goodness, virtues, truth, life everlasting, love, freedom, light, joy, which are our own vague ways of describing some things that may actually not be describable in terms of words. Communication, part of the challenges is how do we deal with this with spiritual therapy, for instance, or holistic therapy in patients who are not able to communicate due to speech and language disability or cognitive impairments? How do we handle end-of-life and transition concerns in the context of neurology revolution and spiritual therapy? So we might need to work with other people. We need to be more inclusive in defining our multidisciplinary team or interdisciplinary team to perhaps include those who are vast, who are vast in other fields of medical humanities, philosophy, parapsychology, ethics, communication language arts, and so on and so forth. And this is already happening. In the last WFNR meeting, there was actually a session in which some of these were discussed, neurophilosophy session. And there was a professor of religious studies from Austria who made some presentations. Well, Ibadan is a pace-setter state Ibadan is in Oyo State, which is called the Pacesetter State in Nigeria. And that's because it's the city of first skyscraper, first TV station in Africa, and so on and so forth. And hopefully we are going to be working with everyone across the globe in spearheading and working on this neurology revolution. These are some of the therapies that are offered at the center, just to illustrate. Now, the neurology revolution, how can it advance? To advance the neurology revolution, we have to look at the biophysical wing as well as the psychospiritual wing. We have to look at how to advance the science and knowledge and the technologies of neuroimplants, artificial intelligence. How do we leverage and tap and harness this? The Human Brain Project, which will help us to understand the human brain even better, including the architectonic, cytoarchitectonic structures, regenerative medicine, stem cell therapies, human affectome project, human cognitive neurotechnologies, brain-computer interfaces, neurotransformics, neurogenomics, neurorobotics, all of these that are happening right now, genetic engineering, CRISPR technology, gene therapy, neurostimulation. But we shouldn't forget neurophilosophy, medical sociology, neuromusicology, literary arts, communication language, spiritual psychology, neuroethics, and so on and so forth. All of this within the concept of One Health, driving the brain health and neurology health agenda, the concept of neurology quadrangle across the care continuum, leveraging digital health and social media for dissemination and impact, and the WHO IGAP, of course, which we started this lecture with, and WHO NCDs. Just to illustrate the advances, the promises of neurostimulation, of the bionic eye, of what artificial intelligence can do or cannot do, including knowing, and of course, including also the limitations of ChatGPT. This morning, I saw a cartoon of people seated inside an airplane, and the pilot was absent. Pilot wasn't there, and the pilot just said, "This morning I'm going to be working from home." And this tells us the implications of digital technology. So neurorobotics, neuroimplants, so all of these are very, very stimulating and very exciting. We've talked about the transomics, the ERA, net neuron, the human connectome project. Needless to say, the brain that we carry contains connections that is probably even bigger than that of the internet. 10 raised to power 11 connections. Each neuron, and we have about 10 raised to power 9 neurons. Each neuron has at least 1,000 connections. And it is the configuration of these connections that store our memories and our experiences. And that is why brain transplants may not work, because who is the owner of the brain and who is the owner of the body? So neurotechnologies are receiving a lot of attention, as we can see, with a lot of investments across the globe, and patents, and the neurostimulation includes, of course, temporal interference magnetic stimulation, transcranial electric stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and transcranial focus ultrasound. All of these have been experimented. We're also trying to read the brain, by assessing brain activity, state of the brain, BCIs, bidirectional BCIs. All of these are important, and they may be very important in terms of promoting recovery from neurological conditions and making the impossible possible, as is augmented and virtual or mixed reality. But we should not forget also the human affectome project, which is mapping the different affects and emotions known to man, and their neuroanatomical and neurophysiological substrates and templates using functional imaging. Of course, the Human Brain Project is also extremely important. It may take some time for this to be realized. And we should not forget the promises of regenerative medicine and stem cell therapies for recovery. All of these in the context of One Health. Most of the time we focus on just one person, but we should not forget public health, global health, One Health, and of course, planetary health, and perhaps our role in the universe. Medical humanities is very important, but we've said defining spiritual well-being is tough. One definition could be that spiritual well-being involves finding and living one's life purpose and understanding the values and beliefs of that that guide one's actions. Finding and living one's place, purpose, and position in the universe or in the grand plan. Non-reductive neurophilosophy, ontologies, and all of these are also important. Neuromusicology, neurolinguistics, neuroethics. So these are, and of course, theater and applied arts will also be very useful in recovery. We should not forget ethereal arts, surreal arts, all of which may appeal to the spiritual or the subconscious mind and help with recovery. The spiritual brain, spiritual psychology, so all of these are fields that are emerging that may help us to understand even more. This is not entirely new, even though this could be revolutionary if combined with all that is happening right now. The concept of ikigai, which has been partly responsible for the longevity and well-being of the Japanese, is finding an intersection between one's mission, passion, what one loves, what one is good at, profession, vocation, what you are paid to do, and what the world needs. Finding that intersection, it's a way to attain resonance, impact, and spiritual well-being. And of course, the flow of life diagram and resonance, which are shown earlier on. To summarize, we can turn science into medicine, and medicine, which is at the center of all the sciences and the arts, we can turn into holistic well-being. The paradigm introduced by the WHO IGAP is a new paradigm. Promoting brain health will revolutionize human health and sustainable development, particularly if combined with innovative and emerging concepts of holistic, spiritual, and planetary health. Turning science into medicine, turning science into holistic well-being. Thank you so very much for this wonderful and golden opportunity.
I have a feeling that we're going to replace quality of life or QOL instruments with the Owolabi POL or purpose of life instrument. I see a day.
Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. And thank you for being such an important member of our HE Academy and the ecosystem that we're building there. Something very important, this global think tank. So Mayowa, thank you very much for your time.